Helene was a 1,000-year storm with devastating impacts across western North Carolina, but the term 1 in 1,000-year event, what does that mean? And why can we see storms like that more frequently than the term may suggest? The proof is in the fact that we've had 2 this year already. This is a live edition of the Carolina Weather Group for Wednesday, October the 23rd, 2024. I'm James Brierton in Charlotte, North Carolina, and welcome to this live edition of the Carolina Weather Group, streaming on Facebook and YouTube and available for audio podcast playback wherever it is you get your audio podcasts. Joining me on my panel this week is Scotty Powell in Myrtle Beach. Our guest is Corey Davis of the North Carolina State Climate Office. He's the assistant state climatologist. And also joining us is Clay Cheney, meteorologist with the National Weather Service in Greenville, Spartanburg. Good evening to both of you. Thanks so much for making the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Corey,
great to join you guys again.
Yeah, it's really good to see you guys and to get your expert perspective. You guys are both in the thick of Helene as it occurred and in the aftermath. I know we've been pouring through a lot of data as systems have come back online, and you guys have a fabulous blog up on your website where people can go and learn more about climate in the Carolinas. In particular here, we're looking at your post from just days after Helene, where you wrote about the historic flooding that Helene caused in western North Carolina. And, you know, we're so glad you were able to join us tonight because we really want to help ourselves and our audience understand what the term 1,000-year weather event means. It keeps kind of getting tossed around in the retrospective of Helene and the recovery, but let me just throw that first definition to you, if I may, Corey. What is 1,000-year event?
Well, I'll say I'm glad that you brought our blog up because that was really one of the first times we were able to put this storm in perspective. It was only a few days after the storm ended, and that's our role as a public service center at the North Carolina State Climate Office, is taking that data that we've got historically and then putting current events in that historical perspective. And you're right, when we look at some of the totals, especially in the Asheville area, in the mountains around there from Helene, we found that those came out to be a 1 in 1,000 level event. Now, that's a bit of shorthand that we use meteorologically. It's really better described as an event that has a 1 in 1,000 chance of occurring in any given year. It could be the same for a 1 in 100 event. Again, that would have a 1 in 100 chance of occurring. And when you think about it in that terms, the odds of happening in any given year, you also see that that doesn't mean if you've just had a 1 in 100 year event, then you're in the clear for the next 100 years. Those background odds are the same every year. Now, the big question is, are those odds changing over time? This may be something we'll talk about a little bit in more detail, but I think now that we've had not only Helene, but also potential tropical cyclone 8, also more recent storms like Matthew and Florence. We've had now 9 total storms over the past 25 years that have brought at least 18 inches of rain somewhere in North Carolina. It seems pretty obvious that these events are becoming more common. So even though the data would suggest it's a 1 in 1,000 level event, in all likelihood, it is not that rare of an event. And again, we are seeing those events happen more frequently just over the past couple decades.
Yeah, you named some of them. I wrote down the ones I could find too. Florence, Fred, Floyd, lots of F names it seems, but also Matthew, as you mentioned. So I guess one of the ways, and before we get into Helene in particular, one of the ways I guess our audience could just think about a 1 in 100, 1 in 500, 1 in 1,000 is those are just statistical averages. Is that right? Of how often something like this might occur?
Exactly. And this gets to the other question about how do we know what a 1 in 500 level event is when we've only been recording weather observations in most areas for about 100 years. There are some sites, especially in western North Carolina, where the data goes back a little further, but that's still only into the late 1800s. So that's, 125 years or so of observations. So the way that we determine those frequencies is that we take shorter time periods and the rainfall events that do occur more regularly over those shorter periods. So as an example, in the Asheville area, we've been making weather observations at the airport location since the 1940s. That gives us about 80 years or so of data from that site. We know that the sorts of events that happen every 20 to 25 years tend to be of the magnitude of about 7 inches over a 3 or 4 day time span. the same sort of length of time that it took Helene to move through. So when we look at that historical record, we do find that there are 4 to 5 of those sort of 7-inch events over a 4-day time period. So that's where we get that 1 in 25-year total. We can do the same thing with, say, a 1 in 2-year total, a 1 in 10-year total, all the way up to 1 in 50, 1 in 100, the sorts of time periods where we have measured that amount of time. And then if we fit all of those data points to a curve, mathematically, it makes a very nice, easy way of extrapolating further out. So what's a 1 in 200-year level event, or 1 in 500, or 1 in 1,000? So when you hear those terms, it's based on that mathematical curve that we're looking at using data that we already know that's measured over shorter durations.
Yeah, 1917 for Asheville, I know was the big one. 2024 now with Helene, that was a 1,000-year event that occurred in a 100-year time period. But as you talk about in your blog, Helene in itself was the second 1,000-year event we saw in North Carolina, and I think you mentioned it already. It's the unnamed potential tropical cyclone 8. Is that right, Corey?
That's right. And just keep in mind, these two storms happen only about 3 weeks apart. So absolutely remarkable to have two events of that magnitude, 1 in 500, 1 in 1,000 level rainfall in opposite ends of the state. These were not connected events. In some cases, it would be easy to say, well, one event led to heavy rain in this part of the state and then it moved over another part of the state. That wasn't the case here. Potential tropical cyclone 8 was long gone before Helene and its predecessor rainfall moved through. So these were disconnected events that still produced those extreme totals in parts of North Carolina.
Yeah, let's talk about that predecessor event in combination with Helene, because on the blog, you guys have some of the data you have collected from your stations. For folks who haven't seen previous shows we've done with the Climate Office, you guys have your own network of instruments in addition to what you might get from your partners, say at the National Weather Service and likewise. So can you walk us through, Corey, some of the data you guys have collected so far in the aftermath of Helene, and what did we see?
Yeah, so our North Carolina EcoNet now has 45 weather stations all across the state. We do have a pretty good density of stations in the mountains, including some high elevation mountain locations. We've got a station high atop Mount Mitchell, the highest point in the state, highest point in the Appalachians. It had more than 24 inches over 3 days during that event with the predecessor front and then Helene moving through. Just south of Asheville on Bear Wallow Mountain, we measured 20 inches at that site. Out on Frying Pan Mountain, we had 17 to 18 inches. And as you're showing here, the wind gusts were also really impressive. 106 mile per hour gust on Mount Mitchell, 87 miles per hour on Frying Pan Mountain. Those rival the strongest gusts that we've ever measured in those areas. And I know, Clay, from talking to some of the folks at the Weather Service out in your neck of the woods, they've said it was really a case of a remnant Category 4 eye wall just collapsing over that part of the state. And that's why we saw such extreme winds and also that catastrophic damage, not just from flooding, but from what looks like a tornado, just from those strong winds coming down to the ground.
Yeah, go ahead, Clay, if you want to add on to that.
Yeah, so with part of the remnant eye wall that actually moved through the area, one of the things we actually saw in terms of the radar data was a lot of mesovortices. And so for that term, it's basically a sense of where inside the remnant eye wall, it was producing, tornadic-like gusts, very sporadic, and able to actually what we call mixing down to the surface. And so all the high winds that are just above our heads were able to reach the surface and kind of, move in different directions, right? And so in that sense, whenever you're looking at the tree fall damage and everything that happened with the wind associated with Helene, it just made it look like there were a lot of tornadoes and a lot of localized spots. But in this case, it was just kind of the overall overwhelming power and the wind field that Helene was able to sustain itself as it moved through the Western Carolinas.
We're taking a look at some of that aftermath video right now. If you're watching the Carolina Weather Group this week on YouTube or Facebook, or even if you're playing us back on Spotify, we can see the power crews have been out there trying to clean up all that water damage, all that storm damage. We're looking at the devastation left behind in Chimney Rock and here in Bakersville. Clay, in your time with the National Weather Service, I presume it's safe to say you haven't seen anything like this. Have you? Does this rival anything you've combated before, and what type of lasting impact does this leave for somebody operationally so close to the minute by minute of that day?
Well, I've been an operational meteorologist for a little over 5 years now, combining the National Weather Service and AccuWeather, and this is by far the most significant event I've ever been a part of. There's been meteorologists that have actually been at this office since the late 90s that even said that they haven't seen anything like this before, if that kind of gives you any perspective. As far as, what this does to someone who works operationally in the field, it's kind of, there's really no words to express it in a sense. You go through each and every day providing forecasts, providing warnings for the public and just our core partners in general. And operationally, when you're sitting there and trying to grasp all the data that's coming in and trying to message that to everyone, and you're saying words like catastrophic and life-threatening and flooding and all the other impacts that were included in this, it's really hard to fathom that when the level of devastation exceeded that. So operationally, I think this will be something that'll be studied, especially from a social science standpoint, for a very long time, in the sense of, where could we have improved as far as our messaging? Whenever we see the signs of something this catastrophic happening to the area, when do we start to message, things like catastrophic and devastation to certain areas? It's just one of those things operationally where we have a lot that we can learn from this. Overall, I mean, we did the best that we could as far as messaging, but it can always be improved. And I think Helene is going to be one of those storms that we always refer to whenever we compare any kind of situation or any weather event similar to this. And I think in the long run, if there's any positive takeaway, is that this will kind of force people to heed any kind of warnings and dire messaging that's coming from, National Weather Service meteorologists or even those in the media and such. And so I think that's one of the things that we can take home when it comes to the impacts that happened from Hurricane Helene.
Yeah, I think, Clay, this storm will definitely stay with me and so many others. Corey, let me bring you back in. One of the benefits to having the climate office on the show is you guys have a lot of that data that Jared Reedy was telling us about last week that is tucked away and stored away, and then you guys kind of analyze it. So are there any storms, Corey, that in compared to Helene, climate wise speaking, and is there any way to know when a storm like Helene could return again?
Well, it's interesting at the climate office. I feel like my job is part historian and part storyteller, because we are looking at all of that data, those records that go back more than 100 years in some cases, looking at how our weather has played out over time and how those current events fit in. So when we look especially in Western North Carolina, there's a few events that are on a similar level in terms of producing flooding in the mountains. One of those you mentioned earlier, back in July of 1916, that had been the flood of record for the Asheville area. That's when up in Alta-Pass, they had 22 inches of rain in 24 hours, still a state record for the most rainfall in one day. And all that floodwater poured down the French Broad and the Shenandoah rivers, wiped out places like Biltmore Village. So now we can look at what Helene did and how it compares to events like the flood in 1916. I think the most remarkable comparison is just south of Asheville, in Fletcher. This is on the French Broad River as it's running toward the Asheville area. It crested 10 feet higher during Helene than it did back in 1916. Just absolutely amazing to think about a river getting that much further above what was already an extreme record level. Also, I think we don't just have to limit this to Western North Carolina. We can think about Helene's place in all the hurricanes that have affected our state. The only storm I think that really rivals Helene is Florence back in 2018 for a lot of the same reasons, in that Florence was the most extreme event Eastern North Carolina has ever seen. The only other storm in our state's history that produced more than 30 inches of rainfall in parts of the state. I think the widespread scale of both storms also stands out. You know, you think about an event like Tropical Storm Fred in 2021, that was a big event along the Pigeon River and other parts of the mountains, but it was also fairly localized, and that it was only a handful of counties that were seeing those effects. With Helene, we were basically looking at the entire western third of the state getting record rainfall totals, setting record river and flood levels. And again, that's similar to what we saw from Florence. So unfortunately, we already know that the death toll from Helene has surpassed Florence. It's surpassed what we saw from any of those other historical storms, including back in July of 1916. And I saw just today the governor's office has estimated $53 billion in damage in the western part of the state from Helene. So it looks like it will also be, by a pretty good margin, the most damaging and costliest storm in our state's history.
Yeah, you read my mind, Corey. Just sticking this headline up here. The governor, Roy Cooper, holding a briefing today, talking through the amount of money the state lawmakers have already approved, as you mentioned, $273 million for recovery, and the governor now wants to see even more to help cover what he's calling $53 billion in damage. From this storm. And, you know, I think you brought up another good point there, Corey, too, which is that, you know, let's not forget about the other storms that have occurred, because there are still people all of these years later still trying to rebuild and recover after Florence. And so we know that the recovery efforts from Helene are going to take quite a long time, too. Coming up in the second half hour of this week's edition of the Carolina Weather Group, we're going to talk to some small businesses in the Boon area. They are open for business, and we want to tell you about them as they work through their economic recovery. But first, let's go down to Scotty Powell in Myrtle Beach tonight for this next thought. Scotty.
Yeah, thank you, James. One thing I had, Corey, for you and Clay, being from Western North Carolina in the Morganton area, obviously I wasn't alive in 1916, but the one flood event that really stood out to me that was a little bit of comparability and really not that much, but was the back-to-back hurricanes in 2004 with Francis and Ivan. And I was wondering, like, where does Francis and Ivan and Helene kind of stack up? Have you been able to look at that, Corey?
Yeah, so we've gotten several questions about this. Folks who were around 20 years ago who remember what it was like in September 2004 and wondering why Helene was that much worse. And especially looking at the Asheville area, there's a few reasons for that. Even though the highest totals in that area of the state, for instance, on Mount Mitchell, were pretty similar during Francis and then during Helene, what we saw with this latest storm is that the upstream totals, like along the South Carolina border, down in the Hendersonville area or out at Brevard, they were a lot higher during this latest events, and in some cases, a double what we saw from Francis in 2004. The other big contributor was just the rain that fell locally in places like Asheville. Going back to Francis in '04, that was only about 5 inches of rain from the storm in Asheville itself. And again, they had some flooding because water had flowed in from high elevation areas around there. With Helene, we were looking at 14 inches of rain in Asheville during that storm, so almost triple what they saw during Francis in '04. So, you know, we often hear Asheville described as a bowl. Whatever water falls there is going to stick around, and I think that was the case with Helene. You had already filled up the bowl with rain that had fallen in Asheville, and when those rivers started to flow through the city, there was just nowhere for that extra water to go, and that's why across Buncombe County we saw such devastation from this storm compared to what we've seen even with some of those big historical events.
Corey, one of the things you guys wrote about in your climate blog was NOAA Atlas 14. Wasn't a term I was familiar with. Other people might be coming across it too. What is the NOAA Atlas 14?
Yeah, this is the go-to resource for meteorologists, for folks that study flooding, for engineers, basically anybody that's designing a structure or a bridge or a dam. they need to know about how often extreme events like this will happen. So Atlas 14 is based on historical data, again, about 100 years of data for most sites. And they've looked at what those frequencies are. How often does 5 inches of rain happen in 24 hours or 48 hours? And then that can give you those return frequencies. Again, this is your 1 in 1,000 year type event, or an event that has a 1 in 1,000 chance of occurring in every given year. So what we see with Helene is really a range across Western North Carolina. It's actually interesting. If you're just looking at the raw hourly totals, the most rain that fell in a single hour, those don't look that impressive. In Asheville, they had 1.6 inches of rain. That was their wettest hour during the storm. Atlas 14 says that's something like a 1 in 2 to 1 in 5 year event. So the sort of event that you would expect to see pretty often, at least every couple years. But it's when we start getting at those longer time durations, over 24 hours or 3 days, or especially 4 days, which is when rain was falling during Helene. That's where we see those more extreme numbers. I'll just give you a flavor for how those varied across the mountains. If we go a little bit further west, away from the heaviest totals, places like Franklin had about 7.5 inches of rain during the storm. Atlas 14 says that's around a 1 in 25 years sort of event. Morganton, like you just mentioned, Scotty, they had about 8.5 inches of rain. That's roughly a 1 in 50 year type event. But then we start getting into places like Cullowhee and Waynesville. Upwards of 10 inches of rain there. That's a 1 in 100 to 1 in 200 level event. And you pretty quickly get into some of those wettest spots. Lake Lure, Boon, 17 inches of rain there, a 1 in 500 level event. And again, those most extreme totals in places like Asheville, Brevard, Banner Elk. Atlas 14 says those are more than 1 in 1,000 year level events. So again, the type of event that you would expect to see less frequently than 1 in 1,000 years. And I think we've got at least a dozen good long-term weather stations in that part of the state that all had record rainfall and all showed those extreme levels of rain based on the Atlas 14 data.
Clay, let me ask you for your perspective as somebody who was sitting in the hot seat with your colleagues at the National Weather Service. The Greenville-Spartanburg office, where you're sitting tonight, covers so much of Western North Carolina, including Asheville, but also upstate South Carolina, and even over to the I-77 corridor. What's going on in the office as you guys are watching day after day these rainfall amounts just kind of build upon each other?
Yeah, I think that's when we started to realize, hey, this is the real deal. Going back to Thursday morning in particular, I remember seeing a lot of our, we got CocoRoss data, RAWs, all these different like Mesonet sites and everything that were recording, the daily precipitation amounts over the past few days with the predecessor event that we alluded to earlier. And we're seeing totals between 6 to 12 inches, and then you have your locally higher amounts in those areas that Corey was referring to. And Helene hadn't even gotten here yet. I think that was one of the things that was really key as far as, the swelling of the rivers and the streams and the creeks that were most impacted by the predecessor event and Helene. And so just in the combination of the two and leading up to it, we were, we had to keep our cool, especially considering we're the ones out sending the alerts and like the flash flood warnings. We even had a couple of tornado warnings. Some of the things that were ongoing before Helene is we were already issuing flash flood warnings. So to kind of give you a sense of how much rainfall was actually falling prior to Helene's arrival, really put into perspective of what we were dealing with. And just going back to the whole messaging thing, it's one of those things where, there's only so much that you can say. And I think, that part and as a whole is really, as far as what was impacting us at this office here, basically, we just wanted to make sure that we were getting every single part of the messaging as far as flooding, wind impacts, and there was a little bit of panic in there, but we worked really well as a team, and it was definitely a team effort here at GSP. I have a lot of great colleagues here, very smart, very intuitive, and just on the spot as far as what needs to go out and how we do things around here as far as issuing warnings and putting that message out.
I have another question. You can see the video rolling here. This was in the Morganton area. This was right below Lake James, and you could just see the homes just completely washed off their foundation. And we were talking about the wind earlier as well, and it's just very reminiscent of catastrophic tornado damage in some locations. But Corey, I wanted to get back to you. We mentioned PTC 8 a little bit earlier, and I forecast for the Myrtle Beach area. So Brunswick County really not in our forecast area, but we were keeping an eye on it that day because of just the flooding, and Highway 17 was shut down. Numerous folks trying to get back into the Grand Strand were stranded for several hours. With the Atlas 14 data, what was that showing for? I know coastal areas are prone, especially during tropical season, to see these higher rainfall totals. But I mean, can we talk a little bit about that system, and just is it fairly rare to see that concentrated rainfall and kind of one location, or what were the thoughts of you from that system?
Yeah, when we look at places like Wilmington, and especially just south of Wilmington, the Carolina Beach area, also in Brunswick County, the Southport area, they both had 20 inches plus of rain during that PTC 8. Atlas 14 says that was something like a 1 in 500 year event. Really, the only comparable storm they had in the record over that duration was Hurricane Floyd back in 1999. That was a 24-inch event in Southport. So for some folks, it was probably exaggeration when we said this was a Floyd-level event, but it really was based on the rainfall totals. It was that extreme of a storm in that corner of the state. As you see on the map here, the rain was not as widespread as we saw from Floyd. So thankfully, we didn't have the inland freshwater flooding issues. But yeah, you look at some of the videos, some of the photos from Brunswick County, from Carolina Beach, they had several feet of standing water in the streets. They would be used to seeing that if it was from storm surge that had been driven in by the wind, but there was no storm surge from this. It was just from that heavy rain falling, especially over that one Monday in a very short time period that produced so much of that flooding and standing water.
And not only was it producing flooding water, but numerous tornado warnings issued that day from the National Weather Service in Wilmington. And I wrote myself and James Hopkins, the meteorologist working with in the morning, we were just like, we're glad that's not in our area, but we're also very, concerned about the folks who were affected by that, because like you said, a lot of rainfall comparison of Hurricane Floyd. So I appreciate that input.
Yeah, and keep in mind that this storm hit only about a month after Tropical Storm Debbie. Another extreme rainfall event, 12 to 15 inches of rain in that same part of Brunswick County. So that one area has had, in some cases, 30 inches of rain in the span of about a month. So that's, no matter whether it's a tropical storm or not, that's a lot of rain in a pretty short time.
That is, and now we can't buy a raindrop down
here. But I was just going to bring up. I was going to say, Corey, not to put you on the spot, but what does the climate data say about this dry spell we're in now? How unusual is this? It feels.
Well, it's definitely rare to be this far into October and have most of the state yet to really see a drop of rain. We've seen, 1/100th of an inch in Raleigh and in Charlotte and in several other sites across the state. And the prospects are not looking that great to get any decent rain before the end of the month. There's a slight chance of showers on Saturday, but not sure how much moisture is going to be associated with that front as it comes through. But, you look back over the last 12 months, this is not the first time that we've had an extreme dry spell right before or right after an extreme wet period. You go back to last fall, October and November, very dry. We had similar 20-plus day stretches without any measurable rainfall. And then by Thanksgiving, and especially in December, we started just turning the faucet back on, getting a ton of rain then. You go back to June, also very dry and also very hot. So we saw those flash drought conditions emerging. Then we get into July, August, September, just get way more rain than we know what to do with. And now we're back on the dry side. So ultimately, this speaks to one aspect of our climate that's changing that we're starting to notice happening more and more in recent years. Our precipitation events are getting more extreme. So when it rains, literally it pours. You're seeing heavier amounts falling over a shorter time period. And then you're also seeing longer dry spells between those rain events. So again, this is not the first case of this happening. It's happened now 3 times in the last 12 months. And we've seen this happening more and more in recent years. Even go back right after Hurricane Florence in 2018. Plenty of rain at the coast then, but also they got into a pretty dry stretch that fall. Go back to 2016. We had Hurricane Matthew that just inundated eastern North Carolina, all while the western part of the state was in an extreme drought and seeing a bad wildfire season beginning. So just more and more of those extremes are happening now in all corners of the state.
And let me ask you, Corey, this last question on this topic, because you mentioned climate. As the climate is changing, can we expect to see more 1,000-year events like Helene?
Absolutely. There's debate about exactly how rare an event like this is anymore. I will say that NOAA is in the process of creating Atlas 15. This is well overdue because we know that Atlas 14 does not include some of these more recent heavy rain events. So Atlas 15 will include a lot of these more recent storms. Also, it will be more high resolution. So we'll be able to get estimates where we don't have long-term weather stations, just based on some of the other good, reliable gridded data sets that we've got, like radar-based estimates. And then also they're including a future-looking component. So based on what we know about climate change and its impacts on our temperatures and our precipitation, what may events look like in the future, like by the end of the century? So all in all, I think we can definitely say that these events will not be as rare in Atlas 15 as they are in Atlas 14, whether that means they're a 1 in 50 year or a 1 in 200 year event then, as opposed to a 1 in 1,000 year event now. Not exactly sure, what those numbers will come out to be. But again, I think the proof is in the pudding. You look at those 9 storms over the past 25 years that have brought at least 18 inches of rain in parts of the state, when we had about 2 of those over the previous century. We know that these events are happening more often. And I think the scary part is that we can learn lessons from eastern North Carolina. After Hurricane Floyd came through in 1999, people there were told it was a 1 in a 500, 1 in a 1,000 year event. They figured they would never see anything close to that extreme in their lifetimes. So they pretty much rebuilt exactly the same way. And now they've had at least 2 events that extreme, if not more extreme, with Matthew and Florence since then. So I think that's a good lesson for the western part of the state. Helene's the sort of event that we really never thought would happen, but now it's happened. And since it's happened, that means it could happen again. And, looking back at Florence, there's also been good research that's happened on what Florence would look like in our future climate. It showed that the maximum rainfall, instead of 36 inches, may be more like 56 inches. So these are not small changes that we're talking about. We're talking about even more extremity, even broader areas under that extreme rainfall with threats of extreme flooding. So yeah, it would not surprise me to see another 20-inch plus flooding event somewhere in the state within the next 5 to 10 years, because I think we've got proof over the last 5 to 10 years of these events already happening more often.
Yeah, one thing I actually wanted to kind of add to what you were saying is, you referred to the dry spell that we're currently in and then the dry spell from last fall. And I think one of the things that we're starting to notice is that we're starting to become, tropical dependent, if that makes sense, in terms of getting our rainfall for the fall because of how dry it has been. And now it's like kind of pick your poison, right? It's like, do we want the tropical systems to move through the area to produce all of this rainfall, too much in a sense at one time? Or the kind of con to that is that if we don't get a tropical system move through the area, where does that lead us as far as beneficial rainfall to where we can kind of, expedite any kind of drought condition? So it's kind of a lose-lose scenario if you think about it in that sense. And I think that's part of the trend that we've been seeing here recently as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Clay. And we know that NOAA just put out their winter outlook for the next 3 months. Spoiler alert, it's going to be warm and it's overall going to be dry. There will be exceptions to that on the day-to-day level, as we all know. But overall, when we paint a broad brush over 3 months, that's kind of what we're looking at. So, Corey and Clay, I appreciate the conversation we've had so far. You guys are welcome to stick around. We're going to take a quick break here on the Carolina Weather Group, and we'll have more on the Helene recovery and relief efforts underway when we return with this live edition of the Carolina Weather Group in just 30 seconds.
Have you ever seen what an indoor environmental assessment looks like in a commercial building or business? During a full assessment, we collect data throughout the building and compare the measurements room to room. We can also collect samples that go to a lab, such as the small cassette shown here, which will be analyzed for types and amounts of mold in the air. We follow up with a physical inspection, looking for moisture sources and using moisture meters to determine if any of your building materials are wet.
Go-esg.com or 336-373-1. We know that Helene was a devastating historic storm that is going to stick with all of us for some time in some fashion or another. As the Carolina Weather Group has been doing for the last few weeks, we're going to return in the top left corner of the screen our QR code if you wish to donate to the American Red Cross. This is our WeatherPod's Disaster Relief Telethon. The Carolina Weather Group, Weather Brains, Chaser Chat, Stormfront Freaks, all of you who listen, watch weather podcasts have come together and raised thousands of dollars to help the American Red Cross. There are lots of other relief organizations out there on the ground too. If you wish to donate to them, you certainly can. We want to provide you with a safe and reliable way if you wish to make a financial donation tonight. Something new we're doing starting this week as areas of the western North Carolina mountains reopen. We're talking about Boon, Blowing Rock, West Jefferson. Certain communities have put out a call to action to say, we are open to tourists. You are welcome to come see us. Because as we know, the fall foliage season is so critical to the economic survival of these communities that there are some places that you can safely go to see fall leaves. Not everywhere is reopened. We know even big places like the city of Asheville is still working to get its water system back up and running, which means lots of hotels and restaurants and attractions aren't quite ready in Asheville to welcome you back. But Boon is. And so starting this week on the Carolina Weather Group, we're going to donate some of our airtime to small business spotlights. These are places that you might be able to go visit in person if you decide to travel, or maybe you can shop online this holiday season with them. We're going to start this series with a conversation we recorded with the Boon Chamber of Commerce, who talks about the broader community, the economics of the community as they try to get back on their feet and lay out some ground rules in case you wish to go visit the greater Boon area. Here's part of my conversation. Portions of western North Carolina are reopening after devastation impacts from Helene. One of those areas reopened for business is the greater Boon area. And as part of our effort here at the Carolina Weather Group to help the people and the businesses of western North Carolina recover after the storm, we're highlighting some of those businesses that are once again open for business. Joining us now is David Jackson. He's the president and CEO of the Boon Area Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you for having us, and appreciate your spotlight on our area and all of western North Carolina for that matter.
How was your community impacted by Helene?
Everybody's been impacted. The degree of which that impact has landed on someone's front door has been a little bit different community to community, county to county throughout western North Carolina. If you were near a river or any kind of body of water, chances are that you had it worse than areas that may be a little bit more protected. You know, our mountains give us a lot of things, and sometimes that's shelter, but other times that is absolutely the wrong ingredients for something like this to be exacerbated very quickly. So in our county, in Watauga County, Boone and Blowing Rock, the core of those communities, the downtown business districts and the cities themselves, saw their infrastructure come back fairly quickly, and people being able to get around inside those corridors has been fairly easy. It's just outside those areas where we see the most devastation, and those are quite honestly some of the most beautiful areas and the magnets for people at this time of year. It's that beautiful Valley Cruces Community Park out off of Highway 194. That was ravaged by the Watauga River, and those are the areas that are the toughest. A lot of road access issues, private roads and bridges that have been destroyed, but then even still, DOT trying to get roads open out in the far stretches of the county. The challenge to that is that is where the vast majority of people that work in this county live. If you work in Boone or Blowing Rock, chances are you do not live inside that city. You live out in the hollers and outstretches of the county, and those are again where the vast majority of our people come from and our DNA lives as a community. So it's been tough from that perspective because this is a time of year that's very welcoming, one that we enjoy welcoming people, but we've had to welcome them with a lot of caveats recently because of what's happened.
Is there anything else people can do, David, to help these communities get back on their feet?
I think we're to the point now where the monetary donations start to mean a little bit more. We were so incredibly blessed with the outpouring of the physical resources, especially in the immediate aftermath of the storm. And those needs have changed. We're looking at a lot of generators, heating sources for people that are still maybe without heat in their homes, or in some counties outside of Watauga that are still without power, warm weather clothing. It snowed already. In 3 weeks, we've had a tornado in Blowing Rock. We've had this hurricane remnant. We had snow last night, or the day before. So, as a meteorological
whirlwind.
podcast, man, you
Yeah.
gotta be loving that in some way. But it's made for some challenges here. So, while those may be the focus of the physical, right now, finding that donation or finding that local business that you love so much, or the organization that you champion, and finding a way to figure out what it is they're doing. The Boone Area Chamber of Commerce Foundation has been about business stability, and trying to help our business partners and our community members in any ways we can. App State has done some tremendous fundraising, a little over $2 million now for displaced students and faculty and staff. And those needs are abundant. It goes just beyond housing. I mean, you're talking about people that lost every possession, lost technology, electronics, the things they need to go to school or teach class are no longer there. So they are fundraising for current needs, but also trying to set people up for success in getting back to a normal routine with their job, or their pursuit of academic achievement. So that's another one. Certainly Samaritan's Purse, some of those organizations, Wine to Water, continue to do not only work here, but at other parts. So I would say find the thing that attaches to your heart. And that again can be calling up a business and saying, hey, here's $100 gift card I want to buy, leave it on the counter. And as aid workers are coming in, or as families that are in need of a warm meal are coming in, use it. That's been a really cool, popular outreach opportunity. It's allowing you to love those businesses from afar, but also keeping the cash flow in those businesses at a time of year when that sets us up for the rest of the other 11 months. And that's a real struggle right now that people are trying to come to grips with.
Well, David, it's very good to hear that you guys are reopened for business. We hope folks get an opportunity to shop and help these communities, because shopping and making purchases is keeping jobs, keeping employment, and keeping the community alive. So we appreciate all you have been doing, and appreciate you taking time to talk with us here at the Carolina Weather Group.
Yeah, thank you very much. My dad's a former TV weatherman, so I've got a special place in my heart for you guys. And yeah, we appreciate the outreach again, and look forward to seeing you all up here very soon.
Very, very good. Thanks, David. Well, let's kick off this series, and we thank David for his time and kind of setting the groundwork there on what it is that you can do to help these businesses, whether in person or online. We're going to talk first with the Mast General Store. You can see them right here on the right side of the screen. When you look at this heartbreaking footage of King Street from that infamous day, now September the 29th, as Helene came through, flooding coming down the street and flowing into many of these stores, including right up to the front doors of the Mast General Store. And if you've been to King Street, you've probably shopped with them. Well, we had a chance to talk with their general manager about how they're reopening for business and their state of affairs. Take a listen. Portions of Western North Carolina are reopening after devastation from Helene. And one of those areas reopening is the greater Boon area. As part of our efforts here at the Carolina Weather Group to help people and businesses impacted by the storm, we're offering free airtime to businesses to help spread the word about what they are doing. And one of those businesses that has reopened its doors is the Mast General Store, the iconic store right there on King Street in downtown Boone. Joining us now is Kendra Sink. She is the general manager. Kendra, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Tell us a little bit about your business.
Mast Store is one of these fun places that even before I worked here, I came as a child, and it's just we've got something for everybody. A lot of people say it's not just a store, it's an experience. We've got any kind of candy you probably had as a small child, and that can be if you're 80 years old, we still have the candies that you had as a small child. So we have candies, we have a fashion department. We specialize in outdoors, so we have all of your brands: Patagonia, Birkenstock, North Face, a lot of it cool. And then we also have, like I said, we have a mercantile department. We have every kind of jams and jellies and ointments that your grandma used to use.
How was your business impacted by the storm?
So we were honestly very fortunately, as I was before I lost power and internet, I was actually watching, and I thought by the looks of it, it looked like we had totally flooded. But fortunately, one of the managers was able to make it in that day, and we didn't get hit with too much water. There were some businesses on Howard Street and a little bit further down King Street that did, but honestly, in the magnitude of what happened, we were very, very fortunate, and not just Mast General Store, but honestly, all of downtown Boone. When you see some of the other towns and what it did to them, we were very fortunate. From what I understand, every business in downtown Boone is open back up. We did not lose any business, so we had some flooding issues, but we were able to honestly get those under control within the first week.
How is the downtown district doing, and how can people support these communities?
I think the downtown, a lot of our businesses are struggling. Our restaurants are struggling. For the first 2 weeks, we were asking everyone to stay away, stay away, stay away. And that's honestly half of our month. And it's honestly half of our busiest time. Unfortunately, this could not have happened at a worse time. I mean, we don't ever want something like this to happen, but it could not have happened at a worse time when it comes to businesses, because it is our time that we typically get very busy. It's our leaf looking time, and it's our time to really, someone said in our meeting, this is when we squirrel our money away for the winter months when no one's coming. So it hurt hard. And I think that, the first 2 weeks we were open 4 hours a day. And honestly, the only reason we opened was because they asked for essential businesses to open. And at that moment, with everything that was going on, we sell cooking fuel, and we sell cooking stoves, and we sell headlamps and flashlights. And that's the only reason why we even opened that Saturday. And we stayed open for 2 hours, and we put a sign on the door, we'll be here every day from 12 to 4. And it wasn't because we were making money. It was because we had some things that I was concerned that there were people in this community that they were in need of. So, and most businesses weren't open. It wasn't until this past Friday when the chamber, made the statement that we want you back. You have to be a little careful, and by being careful, you can come from Winston-Salem, you can come from Charlotte, and if you just stay on those main roads, you'll never even know, honestly, that much that's happened. But you've got to stay on the main roads. You can't venture out, onto some of these into some of these other communities that were really impacted, hard from it. But honestly, like I said, you can come now, and you may not even know that anything happened on your way to Boone.
So it's good to know that some of these places are getting back on their feet as we talk about not only the physical recovery, but also the economic recovery. Mast General Store kicking off a new series here from the Carolina Weather Group, spotlighting businesses that you can shop with right now to help these areas recover. This is the mastgeneralstore.com, MAST generalstore.com, with their locations there in Boone, and they will, as they told us, sooner or later, hopefully get their location in Asheville reopened up as well too. I know they are anxious to get that recovery underway. Before we bring Scotty and Clay back in, I want to bring you a couple more headlines fresh out of recovery operations that are ongoing in the western North Carolina mountains, but also upstate South Carolina and other portions of the southeast that were impacted by the storm. Starting first in North Carolina, we do want to let you know that tonight, the 23rd of October, is the last day for western North Carolinians who lost income and have disaster-related expenses to get help buying food with a program called D-SNAP. You can get help even if you aren't enrolled in FNS or food stamps at any other time of the year. You can apply before the end of tonight, before midnight, or actually rather before tomorrow, the 24th, through tomorrow, the 24th, by calling 1-844-453-1117. You can also visit the website ncdhhs.gov to learn more information. Well, comparatively good news, I suppose, is the headline that we learned yesterday, that the North Carolina county that is home to Asheville, Buncombe County, telling us that they miscounted the number of storm deaths related to Helene. Of course, the number is still astronomically higher than any of us would like to see it, but it is lower than where it was during last week's edition of the Carolina Weather Group. The grand total now across the Southeast sits at 246 total deaths across the states impacted by Helene. That includes 128 in North Carolina, based on data that the Associated Press has accumulated from both states and counties, including in Henderson and Buncombe. And with the disclosure now that Buncombe County had some duplicate numbers and thus an overinflated total, the Associated Press has adopted a new state total of 96 deaths in North Carolina. So the news organization's multi-state tally now sits at 214. A little confusing, I suppose, but some good news when you look at the numbers. It's very unusual for a death toll in a situation like this to go down. And again, still too many lives lost with so many people still grieving. 12 additional counties are now eligible for FEMA assistance. This is now available at disasterassistance.gov. I'm going to read off the names of the new counties in just a moment for those of you listening on our audio podcast. But for those of you watching with us, we're also scrolling them across the bottom of the screen right now. Those new counties are Cabarrus, Cherokee, Forsyth, Graham, Iredell, Lee, Nash, Rowan, Stanley, Surrey, Union, and Yadkin. Join the list of previous counties that were announced as eligible for FEMA assistance. You can apply at disasterassistance.gov using the FEMA app or by calling toll-free 1-800-621-3362. We're 2 weeks away from the election, and the North Carolina State Board of Elections is telling us that 75 of 80 planned early voting sites in Western North Carolina have already opened for the early voting period that continues now through November the 2nd. You can learn more on their website. The North Carolina Department of Transportation is looking for businesses to help rebuild roads, bridges, and other infrastructure damaged during the storm. They're offering free classes, informational classes for contractor businesses, construction, debris removal, and the like, who might be eligible to bid and contract on some of these jobs. And as we told you earlier in the show, it's going to cost billions of dollars to get the infrastructure back up and running. Speaking of infrastructure, if you're looking to go up to the mountains to maybe shop or infuse some money into those communities, we learned today that approximately 20-mile section of the Blue Ridge Parkway has reopened in Watauga County in the Blowing Rock area. You can access the parkway there, and you can safely traverse, again, approximately a 20-mile section of road. Last headline is one that brings much relief. There are no areas of tropical cyclone activity being monitored by the National Hurricane Center in the Atlantic Basin, not only over the next 48 hours, but over the next 7 days. Bringing Scotty and Clay back in, that, I think, is such a sigh of relief, because I can't tell you, and you guys probably were in this boat too, but after Helene, after PTC 8, after Milton, the amount of text I was getting from people who were trying to debunk misinformation about where storm threats might be popping up, where they might be going, or where even systems that were out there were going. It's such a relief tonight to see there's nothing on that map, Clay.
Yeah, most definitely. One thing that we were going through here at our office was, was there going to be another storm right behind Helene? And of course we had Milton, but as far as the forecast for it, of course, stayed well south of our area. And, we had model runs that were trying to show it sneak in back to the areas that were impacted by Helene. And then the trend, of course, started getting it pushed further south. And, of course, for us, that was a sigh of relief. But a lot of people, still wanted to say, hey, there's going to be another hurricane. Even here, locally, me talking to folks that I know personally wanted to, me to address, hey, are we going to get hit by another storm? And, I was there to debunk any kind of, hurricane threat following Helene. And I think it helped a lot of people feel better in that moment, especially being right after the impacts from Helene. But it is a sigh of relief that as of now, there's no tropical activity expected over the next 7 days, but we are still in hurricane season. It doesn't end until November 30th, so we got to continue to monitor the waters as we move forward over the next month and a week now.
Yeah, certainly. It's hard to believe that October and November are still hurricane season, but they still very much are when you consider how warm the water is and everything else is. Scotty, let me bring you in as we kind of start to wrap up tonight's show. You had a chance to go back to your hometown of Morganton today. Can you share a little bit with us on what you saw there?
Yeah, for that, just want to share with our friends from Charlotte Motor Speedway, North Wilkesboro Speedway. They are also still collecting donations to take up to the mountains, especially warm weather gear like we were talking about with the Boon, Watauga County Chamber of Commerce. Starting to send some of that stuff up there. So if you're in the Charlotte area or North Wilkesboro and you want to drop off some coats or anything like that, please do. Those will get to where they need to be. But going back to Morganton, I was there today. Just a quick in and out. Actually brought some family members down. Our family member down here right after the storm, just because of the lack of power and communication, stuff like that. So was able to get back up there today. And as I was talking to you, James, on the phone, I was still blown away. No pun intended. I didn't mean it to be like that, but just the amount of trees that are still down up there from the just the gusty winds, and it literally is just patches of just down trees everywhere, and still some power lines laying in the road. I mean, still recovery efforts ongoing up there. And a lot of this, what I saw, a lot of businesses there along the Catawba River, just cleaning out the floodwaters damaged and the mold and all that. So it's still going to be a long recovery ahead for a lot of folks. And I do know that one of the first businesses that got flooded out from this event actually reopened on Monday in Morganton. So that's some good news there. So slowly getting back to, I don't want to say normal because I feel like it's a new normal for some folks, but starting to get back to where it used to be. So just continue to keep everyone in your thoughts. And, if you have time to a Friday or a Saturday or something like that, and you want to go roll up your sleeves and put some work boots on, I know folks would really appreciate just helping continue to make sure that the area is getting put back together the best that it can. But there's still damage up there. There's still businesses and homes that are still not livable, or the businesses just can't function yet. So still a lot of recovery left for the folks in the foothills and the mountains of North Carolina.
Yeah, I do want to let people know, if you're trying to figure out where to go and whether or not you can safely get there, the state's website for road closures like this is drivenc.gov. We have it on the screen for you now. All those yellow things are closures. You can also see little reminders that so many of these mountainous roads are always and still are closed to commercial vehicles, because we know with the closure of I-40 and I-26, there is a really grand detour for tractor trailers and the like that normally traverse between Tennessee and North Carolina, and they gotta go all the way around is still the case. In the last few minutes before we wrap up tonight, Clay, let me ask you, how is everyone in your office doing? I know this is a tragedy they not only worked but also lived through in so many senses there in the greater upstate South Carolina area.
Yeah, I think everybody's doing a lot better. I even know for me personally, especially like the first week after, the impacts from Helene, I still had very heavy heart. Any kind of damage photos or anything, any news or information that was coming out, I was still getting teary-eyed and such. And so that's gotten a lot better. I think overall, as far as the office's standpoint, we're still pretty busy here, dealing with the lasting impacts from Helene and providing, recovery and response weather briefings to emergency management and first responders and everybody else. And so we're still dealing with it here. I think it's not as much of a touchy subject as it was. I think we're getting sort of back to normal in the office, despite having the extra workload that comes with it. But of course, we don't mind, because it was much more devastating for those areas up in the western North Carolina. So right now we're just continuing to put our heads down and focusing on the work and the task at hand. I think overall, though, the emotions have at least gotten a lot better over the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's good to hear that there are small slivers of everyday life returning. A little bit different, I imagine, for everybody. Sooner here in Charlotte, certainly, maybe sooner in portions of the upstate or in Morganton versus what we're still seeing in many areas of Western North Carolina that are cut off. But even just in talking with Jared Rainey or Evan Fisher in Asheville last week, telling us that they got power back or got water back, those small little everyday conveniences as they work your way back into your life are certainly a relief. And that's why here at the Carolina Weather Group, we are determined to continue to follow this story for however long it takes so that the folks of the Carolinas know that they are by no means forgotten as we head into the holiday season and into the new year. So, Scotty and Clay, it's been really good to chat with you guys tonight, and Corey as well too. We hope our listeners and our subscribers will stay tuned as we continue in the weeks ahead to see where the recovery efforts take us, continue to spotlight more small businesses, and continue to bring you the show that we bring you each and every week here at the Carolina Weather Group. I will say that coming up in the next few weeks, we are going to finally get to our belated 500th episode celebration of the Carolina Weather Group. This is episode something like 515. We did skip 500. We reserved it, we held it, and we did a really exciting production that we are looking forward and to share with so many of you. I think next week we'll finally be ready to reveal exactly where we went. So be subscribed for that. And we're putting the finishing touches on it now, Scotty, I think is my tease. And I think for folks who are new or folks who've been with us for a while, hopefully they're really going to enjoy this 500th episode.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fun. And who would have thought that? Though I think it was right around the week where you're going to reveal this. All heck broke loose. So
we were putting it together the week before Helene, and obviously haven't aired it yet because it just didn't feel like the right time. So we're looking forward to hopefully getting that back out as we get a little bit closer to the holiday season. And Clay, we're sorry that we weren't able to join you guys for Weatherfest. We know you guys had to shelve that for this year too, but looking forward to having that back next year so all of us can get together in upstate South Carolina too.
Yeah, hopefully we can get it back going next year. I think that's the plan. Of course, it was just bad timing with Helene and everything. But I did want to point out one more thing, if we got a quick second. I was actually out in Swannanoa this past Saturday helping volunteering. Just wanted to point out that it seems like the people out there are in as good of spirits as they can be. One of the things that I did want to mention, as far as if you want to, donate to the folks around there, one of the things of their bigger needs that I think that kind of slips under the radar, no pun intended, is that they're in really desperate need of cleaning supplies and laundry detergent. And of course, as Scotty had mentioned earlier, with the warm clothes with the winter coming and blankets and everything, just wanted to point that out as something, as a more specific need that I noticed while I was up there helping volunteer.
Yeah, Scott and I were talking about this a little bit before too, Clay. So it's good to know we're all kind of on the same wavelength. As there's still debris to be removed, but the water has certainly gone down. Right, it turns now to cleaning. It's mold. It's water damage. It's reconstruction, and so there's a desperate need for a lot of that stuff. I'm glad you brought that up. And the cold weather gear is also very, very pertinent as we start to get into some of these colder nights. Go ahead, Scotty.
Like David said, it's already snowed up there. I mean,
yeah.
Was it last week? I can't remember. I think it was last week.
It was.
Last week it snowed up there, and some places got like an inch or two. So it just kind of shows you we're in that transition period of hurricane, flooding, tornadoes. Now you have to start worrying about winter weather and frost and freezes, which I think, Clay, you guys already determined that the first freeze happened in the North Carolina mountains. So it's kind of all over the place. So those folks definitely need some warm weather materials, because we know how cold it can get up there in the mountains this time of the year.
Yeah, and I'll also extend my thanks on behalf of my day job at WCNC Television. You know, so many of you donated to their Share the Warmth drive to help Western North Carolina storm victims. There was an Amazon wish list where you could go and buy things like jackets and gloves and sweaters. 10,000 items showed up at the TV station. It was the most number of Amazon boxes I've ever seen in my life. It was absolutely incredible. We loaded them up into trucks and they went to places like Avery County and Watauga County these past few days. So, you know, thanks to everyone who's donated either to this drive, guys, or another drive like it. As Scotty mentioned, the Speedway will be back next Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken, as they continue their efforts too. So we know, you know, the Carolinas and the country have really stepped up to help these communities out. And you know what? I'm going to leave it on that heartwarming note to know that there are so many kind and caring people out there who are helping the recovery effort, either in person, like Clay was, or remotely, monetarily. It all makes a big difference. So thank you to everyone out there. That does it for this week's edition of the Carolina Weather Group. I'm James Brierton in Charlotte with Scotty Powell in Myrtle Beach, Clay Cheney, and Corey Davis. We thank you for watching, and we will see you again next Wednesday night for an all-new edition of the Carolina Weather Group. Be well.